Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 16 of the Bound to Improve podcast. My name is Chris Pound.
My name is Landon Eller, and this week we decided to read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell.
Before we kind of get into that, let's talk about the implementation from last week. We are recording very similar dates here, and so we haven't really been able to apply the things that we are going to try to imply or implement, I should say. So we will get back to you on that one. Again, his was make one bold move a week, and mine is to start to win through actions rather than arguments.
Awesome. So moving on to the summary of the overall book. So this book was kind of broken up into two parts, and there's a total of 9 different chapters.
Opportunities versus legacy.
Nice. So before we get into it, we'll go with the introduction. It was called the Roseto Mystery. So Roseto was a small town outside of Rome where people had to labor very hard to make a living. So this is right at a time where everybody was going to the United States to search for a better life. So ultimately, I think it was towards the end of 1800s or somewhere in the midst there that they began to, a large portion of that Roseto population began to move to the United States. And feel free to interject at any point.
No, you're good. Yep.
I
like where you're going with this.
Awesome.
Yep.
So most of them settled in a small town in Pennsylvania, and one day there's a doctor who got a beer with another doctor, and they're like, I have never seen anybody from Roseto come into, and they named a town in Pennsylvania Roseto as well, and they're like, I've never seen anybody from Roseto come in to get help and to the doctor's office.
Yeah.
And like their big problem there was like strokes and heart problems, and they never saw any of it. So the one guy decided he's going to investigate this. Like, why is this phenomenon occurring? So first, he thought it was just in the way that they eat. Like, they brought over certain types of genes from their small town Roseto that didn't matter. They were just as unhealthy as everybody else. They were sweets, no exercise.
Like America today.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
Then on top of that, they tried to look for the people from Roseto that didn't move to the small town in Pennsylvania, and they weren't that anomaly either. Like, they still had their health problems. So like, what was the root cause of why they were so like outside the norm?
Yeah.
An outlier. Do you know?
No.
So it was the culture around the environment that they had. So as people would pass by different houses, they would say hi, stop by and chat for them for a while. There was 3 generations living under one roof, so they had utmost respect for their elders and the people that they were with constantly, their family. And there was also a whole bunch of groups that they started. I think it was up in the upper 20s of that small town, promoting like culture, safety, just a whole bunch of groups within that city. And what he was trying to convey here was there's so much more to a person's health and longevity than just their makeup of what they eat and how they exercise.
So what you're trying to say is that social interaction matters.
Yeah, there's more. So what people think is like, I'm going to compare it to how tree grows. Most people think, man, this tree has a very good shell around it. So you plant it in the soil and it's going to be the tallest one in the forest. But little do they know, there's so many more factors that play into that. Is the soil good? Is there light from other trees blocking that light? Did a lumberjack come down and chop it down?
Yeah.
So
did an animal take the
bark
off? Yeah. Little things matter. I think is the big point here.
And there's more than one thing that play into outcomes. So before we get into the first part here, I'll just read you the 2 definitions he begins with. Was what is an outlier? An outlier is something that is situated away from or classed differently from a main or related body, and or a statistical observation that is markedly different and value from others of the sample. So if you want to take us away with or do you have anything to add on?
No, I think you did a good job. Going on to chapter 1 here, the Matthew effect, right? He had a couple different stories in here, including hockey players' birthdays, billionaire tech people's upbringings. At the end of the day, people don't rise from nothing, is the main concept that I was able to pull away from it. They all have different opportunities. It's just what they do with those opportunities.
Yeah, so to touch on your Canadian hockey point, there is so much to, like, Canadian hockey is a meritocracy, ultimately. Like, the best players rise to the top.
Yep.
And there's such a structure in place for Canadian hockey. Like, you have to go through so many different leagues, and ultimately the best people move on to that next league.
Yeah.
So when they start playing for those competitive leagues at around age 9 or 10, this is where the birthdays come into play.
Yep.
The cutoff date was January 1st. Yeah. So people who have birth dates in January...
The perfect birthday was January 1st.
Yeah.
Because they've got an entire year.
Like, if someone was born in October, they have however many months ahead.
2 months.
Like,
3 months.
And in those early days, you're going to be... Like, there's vast differences in terms of physical makeup, size, maturity. So in that league, the best players were always the biggest players.
Yep.
So those in the early months were moved to that next stage.
They had more time to develop, and the bigger they were, the more attention they got, and the more attention they got, the more opportunities they got.
Yeah, like as they kept progressing, more practice ensued. They got bigger and stronger because more attention was focused on them. They got more reps with the better squad, had better teammates.
Yeah.
So that it was kind of like a compound effect. Because they had that cutoff limit and they had that best birthday, they were able to get to that highest level.
Yep.
So I think reading like where this chapter's name came from will help. So Matthew 25 verse 29 says, "For unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath shall be taken away, even that which he hath." So like that was essentially saying what you have. Like if you're able to develop someone, and it's going to just compound in the long run.
Yep. Chapter 2 here, the 10,000 hour rule. I thought this was my favorite chapter in the entire book. And one of the biggest takeaways I had here is practice isn't the thing you do once you're good, it's the thing that you do that makes you good, right? 10,000, okay, let me ask you this. How many hours are in a year?
8,760.
Exactly. So the whole concept is you're not going to be good overnight, right? It takes practice, dedication, and self-sacrifice. And it really just depends on how good you want to be in order to achieve the thing that you want to achieve.
Yeah. And I had that 8,760 down. I just
Yeah.
I didn't memorize that at all. But yeah, like you're exactly right. And I was just doing some other calculations. Like if you work a normal 8-hour job, guess how many years it takes for you to get to your 10,000 hours of that mastery?
If you're working 40 hours a week?
40 hours a week, 8 hours a day.
Man.
Like 5 days a week. Just
10 years.
So it's 3.5.
Okay, I was way off.
But that's still a long time to
That's
develop that mastery.
That's not an overnight thing.
No.
And I think that's where a lot of people kind of get discouraged is in the things that people don't see.
Yeah.
Right? People don't want to put in the time and the effort. And he makes the point that, in order to be a master at something, you have to put in those 10,000 hours that people don't see, like the Beatles and Hamburg, right? They were performing 8 hours a day for days at end, right? They did that repetition over and over and over again to become the Beatles that everybody knows today.
Yep. And another example they use is Bill Gates.
Mm-hmm.
So he had access to a whole bunch of different computer terminals that not
Bill
a lot
Gates or Bill Joy.
Both. I mean, they use both examples.
Yeah.
So both of them had very unique situations where they had access to be able to code for long periods of time.
For free, essentially.
For free.
Yeah.
Saying, I don't know if we'll get into this when we move forward here, but because they accumulated these 10,000 hours, they were essentially masters in their field. So when the computer industry really opened up and laptops that everybody uses now are in place, they were able to capitalize on that because they already had their 10,000 hours in.
They had the foundation built.
Yes. And so they were light years ahead of everyone else because they put in that time when nobody else was watching.
It's like a tree.
Yeah.
They had the seed and it was already starting to flourish. And when when the opportunities started to open themselves up, the tree just opened up and expanded and grew like crazy.
Yeah. And another quote I liked here is achievement is talent plus preparation. And what I thought Malcolm Gladwell did a good job here of portraying was it's not so much of the talent side.
No.
It's way more about the preparation.
No.
And it's kind of what we talked about in the second part of the 48 Laws of Power. It's all about what you're doing on the back end to make your work seem effortless, or like you know what you're doing, even though the landscape around you is still kind of uneasy.
Yeah. Moving on into chapter 3 here, the problem with geniuses, part 1. I guess for me, let me ask you this: what were your thoughts on the brick and blanket test? Remember that portion where you had to come up with?
Okay. Yep.
Yep. When I say brick, what is the first thing that comes to your head? What's it used for?
Buildings.
Exactly. Okay. What else? Expand.
So I'm going straight to the examples in the book. So like you could use it for a weight on a scale.
You use it to throw through a window to break in, right? I think it's all into your perception of things, perception of life, and everybody has different answers. It was just a way to test people's IQ, which was the big picture of these next 2 chapters.
Yeah. So IQ is how most people see. So like if someone has a high IQ, they associate them with having a high level of success.
Yes.
But what was argued here is that's not really the case.
No.
There's thresholds in place that after a certain level of smartness or IQ,
Around 120.
around 120, then it doesn't matter after that. What matters is that practical intelligence. So that goes back to your brick and blanket test. So when right now, pause the video and think of as many things as possible you can do with a brick and a blanket.
Yep.
And what he was trying to get here is people with the highest IQs gave the most cut and dry answers, like keep for a blanket, keep warm.
Yep.
And like for a brick, like build a
house. Yeah. I guess let's kind of dive into the practical intelligence. What is that? It's the knowledge that helps you read situations correctly and get what you want. A lot of people have a high IQ, but they don't necessarily have the PI, the practical intelligence, which is arguably more important, other than Oppenheimer, who apparently had both high IQ and a high practical intelligence to get the things that he wanted.
Yeah, and that just when you have, I'm gonna put that PI in terms of like emotional intelligence, knowing yourself, knowing how to act in certain situations. It's paramount, and until you have to go out of your shell to put yourself and learn those experiences, because boldness, like, because there's only so much knowledge that you can get from a book.
Yeah.
If you're able to go out and get those experiences, that's where those really come in.
Yeah, like Landon mentioned earlier, someone who has reached an IQ around 120, there's very little measurable real-world advantages to have an IQ higher than that. You're just as likely to win a Nobel Peace Prize. Probably not going to win a Nobel Peace Prize, but you have the same likelihood. You're capable of the same things that people who are quote-unquote more intelligent than you are.
Yeah.
Move on to, we kind of tied in chapter 3 and 4 together. It was just part 1 and part 2 of The Trouble with Geniuses. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add? Okay, let me ask you this. Is the education system failing people, or are people just not putting in the time and effort in order to get everything out of the system?
Well, I think that's part of the problem, because like higher education, the second level, they are just looking at people in terms of their test scores.
Yeah.
They're not measuring the level of PI at all.
Nope.
So you could be missing out on the next Bill Gates, the next Steve Jobs, but you don't know it because you're just assessing them by their test scores.
Yeah.
So that's where Malcolm Gladwell is like, this can all be fixed. Like, why don't we just do a lottery system? If you meet that threshold, then why not just do a lottery? Because how can you say that this guy can get in but this guy cannot? And I think that's really an important issue in right now in today's society.
Yeah.
So let me flip that on you. What do you?
Is the education system failing or people failing? I guess for me, I think the education system is catered to one type of people, right? The people who are straight by the book. It doesn't really open up the possibilities for people who don't think the same as everybody else. It doesn't allow people to be creative, I don't think. And I think that could ultimately not only discourage people, right? Because when they're not getting the same attention and opportunities that the people who are straight by the book are, it kind of discourages them to an extent. And I don't necessarily know how you fix that, because obviously there's not enough time in the world. Obviously there's only 875 hours in a year. 8,700 hours in a year. And you're not going to have the time and the resources to treat everybody differently, which I think it's ultimately a lose-lose.
Yeah, so what was the guy's name who was an absolute genius? I'm blanking on it.
Was it Chris?
Langan.
Yeah.
It was Chris Langan. So he had an IQ that was off the charts. It was higher than
Einstein.
Yeah. And throughout his entire life, he was always
belittled to an extent.
Put a step behind the 8 ball. And for example, he going through school, never had.
He grew up dirt poor.
His I think he had 4 brothers, all with a different dad.
Yeah.
So
moved around a lot. Got full scholarships to 2 different colleges, very prestigious colleges.
I don't know. Well, the first one I think he went to was he got a scholarship too, right?
Yeah.
And the second semester, his mom didn't fill out his financial aid.
Yeah. And so he lost his scholarship.
And when he went to go try to plead his case, he couldn't.
No. Because he didn't have the PI.
Because he didn't have the PI. His IQ is obviously off the charts.
Yeah.
He was doing things that I couldn't even fathom.
No.
So then he went to this second school closer to home.
Montana State,
I think so.
I think.
And everything was going good. He worked his tail off to be able to pay for it.
And then the transmission
falls out of his car.
Yeah.
So he goes to the dean and someone else
too. Counselor and the dean.
And he's like, "Can we please just move my classes?"
He had a 7:30 in the morning class and like an 8:30 in the morning class. And all he wanted to do was switch it from the 7:30 to 11. Because he could get a ride to class at 11. And they weren't willing to work with him.
Yeah, and I think it was just in the way that he conveyed his ask, and he wasn't able to get that request granted because he didn't have any of that PI. And it was definitely from a lack of that parenting figure, because that's where most of it's instilled.
Yeah.
But then you go on to someone like Oppenheimer. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure he was raised in the middle to upper middle wealthy class.
He also tried to kill his tutor.
Yeah, but he was able to get away from it because he was able to apply that practical intelligence.
Yeah.
So he knew how to handle the situation.
So what's more important, practical intelligence or IQ?
I think once you hit that threshold,
it's more about practical.
It's more about practical intelligence. Yes,
I would agree with that.
Because you still need to be book smart to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But after that, it's like
street smart.
Yeah.
Right. Pretty much the same thing. You want to move on to chapter 5 here, the 3 lessons of Joe Flam.
Yep.
What did you have here?
So Joe Flam was kind of in this. So
he's a lawyer.
This goes back to it's more about success than just your intelligence level or who you know. So Joe Flam had descendants of. He was Jewish, I'm pretty sure, right? And he was overweight, obviously really smart. So he got into a law program. He was one of the top 2 in his class. And then when it came time for hiring season, he was one of the 2 people that wasn't able to get a job. And it was because he was of that ethnic background that nobody wanted to hire.
Yeah.
Because everybody wanted that Nordic background in that day and age. So what did he have to do? He had to go down the street and take a job at a startup where they were basically accepting anything.
They had no clients, and so it was deemed extremely risky in order to take that job. But when you're kind of put in a corner, you have no other option. And I think this is where I kind of come up with the idea that you never know how good the hand you have is until you start to play with it.
Yeah. So what happened there was everybody was getting all these
Offers.
Well, the other law firms were bringing in all the big business of the time, and Joe and his law firm were left with the butt of the work. Yeah. So they received all of the proxy fights. We weren't very big at the time, but someone had to do them, and they were willing to take the business. Then all of a sudden, at like the snap of the fingers, the total environment, the total landscape of the corporate world changed. So all the people were beginning to get in proxy fights, and it became the norm. So what happens to everybody who, what happens when people get in proxy fights? They want the person with the most experience. So who do they all flock to? Joe. And everybody else was scrambling to him because he put in the time, because he got rejected because of his ethical background.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to think about it, but he was able to capitalize on the opportunity because of his ethical background points.
No matter how crappy the hand that you have is, you can always win with it. It just depends on your perception and what you're willing to do with what you have.
Yeah. What
you're willing to work with what you have.
So another lesson here was the people from Europe who immigrated here that were Jewish, essentially, they were not able to own land, so they all were in urban landscapes, and they all owned good trade skills. So carpentry, sewing, making clothes, etc. So there's one example of the story where they came to America and they tried a whole bunch of different businesses, selling bananas, selling fish, none of it would work. Then he saw a girl with a apron on and was like, oh my gosh, that's our key. And because they knew how to sew, because of their background that they had, as part of being a Jew in Europe, it led them to become a successful business people because they had that trait. So ultimately, what Malcolm Gladwell was really saying here is there's so many different factors that play into your success. Mm-hmm. in your background, where you come from, what your parents did, your ethical background.
Yeah, you're a product of your environment.
Yeah.
And you need to make the most out of what you have.
Yep.
Chapter 6?
Yep.
Harlan, Kentucky. What are your thoughts? Interesting.
Yeah, so here...
How do you deal with insults? Do you get upset, or does it affect you any at all, or...
I think it depends on the type of insult.
Okay, what if I called you? What would you do? Because that was the psychological test that they were doing on people from this area, right? People from down south, when say you were from Texas and I called you, your handshake's gonna get more solid. Your cortisol level is gonna increase. You're just gonna be angrier, right? But people up north had very little change in their reaction. Why? Why do you think so?
Well, in the book, he talks about it's all about where people came from.
Yeah.
So when people came to the United States, the people who settled along the Appalachian Mountains came from the upper England, upper Ireland areas, and they were all about the culture of their family ties. Mm-hmm. So it was an honor to be associated with family members. So any diss on a family member was a diss on everybody, and that was they were willing to go
fighting. They were fighting words. They were trigger words.
Yeah.
Right? You mess with my family, you're messing with me.
But by trigger words, they went and killed other people, other families.
They went to extremes.
Yeah. So as part of up north, they went to the place in the United States that were the most, didn't have a bunch of laws associated with it, were out of the purview of the normal people who settled in the United States. So it was, of course, the people that were in the honor societies that settled there. So what happened along the Appalachian Mountains was there were families who settled in different towns, and they often end up bickering and killing each other because that's all they knew, right? So that goes back to what Chris was saying. There's a test done, I think, at the University of Michigan, and of the one determining factor that showed how they react was where they were from.
Yeah.
Now, it's not because, say, everybody from
The same place reacts the same.
Like, there's still going to be
Outliers.
individual anomalies within the certain population, but as a whole, it generally does a pretty good job at indicating who you are. Yeah, in terms of where you are from.
Anything else you want to add to that, or?
I don't think so.
No? Okay, chapter 7, the ethnic theory of plane crashes. This was an interesting thing to throw in the story. I think my biggest takeaway here is that bad teamwork and communication will always lead to failure, right? When you're, I guess, for personal story here, when you struggle with communication with your significant other, what happens? You fail.
It's like in terms of the relationship, you mean?
And I guess I think it all comes down to how good of a communicator you are, and I think the better of a communicator you are, the better outcome you'll have.
Yeah. So what I thought. So here there was a story. There was what was it? Colombian airline that was flying into New York, and they had to circle a whole bunch of different cities. Because it was bad weather, a whole bunch of traffic coming in, and they didn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, at the root cause of it, it was because the people who were communicating with the air traffic controller was not conveying it because he didn't have authority. So I'm going to mess up this guy's name. I think it was Holstein's or Holsted's like theories. So one of them was like the power development index. So the United States we're a very individualistic society.
Yes.
So we all take things
Personal.
and we say like
We value individual.
we're on the same page.
Yeah. Yes.
Like we're on the same level. So I'm able to communicate to you in the same way you're able to communicate to me.
Mm-hmm.
But people from Colombia, in a sense, are on the opposite end of the spectrum. So they had their first pilot, and then the person who was communicating with the air traffic controller. And because the first person under the main authority was the one communicating, he was timid, in a sense, because he didn't want to, one, upset the actual pilot, and two, the air traffic controller, he thought would be his superior. So he wasn't communicating directly.
There was a vertical relationship aspect.
Yeah, but that's what the Colombians believe.
Yes.
So ultimately, he wasn't able to communicate that, and they ran out of fuel because he didn't sound urgent enough in their voice, and that's what the air traffic controller was looking for, and they didn't get it because of that miscommunication. So it's just like there's a Korean airline who had a bunch of crashes and was probably one of the most unsafe airlines because they were also on the lower end, similar to Colombia. So someone came in from Delta and reinvigorated the entire culture by making them, he didn't fire anybody, he just made them learn English because that was the universal language of the air, he said. And by learning English, they were able to communicate on the same level.
Yeah.
So by being able to communicate on the same level,
So he was instilling a horizontal relationship aspect.
Exactly, which is crucial in
communication.
Like if you're out of fuel, you can't just say, I'm almost out of fuel. Like you probably hear that from everybody who's coming in on a flight.
The person who cries wolf, right? Have you ever heard that story?
I mean, it sounds familiar, but you'll have to.
It's like the person who panics right off the bat, right? I don't know how this ties in. We'll just continue.
Okay. I'm ready to move on to
chapter 8, the rice patties and math test. This was another interesting chapter in the book, and I would just kind of let you go right into this one.
So, Asian people are usually associated with being able to be better at math.
Yes. Why?
Because First is the aspect of our language differences.
Yep.
So they have their language, how they say their numbers is very short. So if I give you a strand of 10 numbers, for example, I think
you don't remember
2 and 7 were C and key, I think. So if they're able to say those strand of numbers in a short amount of time, then they're going to be able to remember it more because they get more repetitions in remembering it. In terms of the other time, like Americans have a very difficult
they've got a very diverse language.
So when they're counting those numbers, it's going to be harder to remember because it takes longer for them to speak the words. Also, in terms of learning the math, think about, this was unique to me in terms of, I never thought about it this way before. So we have like 10, 11, 12, 13, and then we switch back to 14, 15. So like 11, 12, and 13 are complete anomalies in the number structure. Then we get up to like 20, 21, 22, and those numbers are flipped. So like 14, the 4 came first, but it's at the end of the number. Then we say 22, and you see how that's at the end of it.
Yeah.
But in the Asian languages, they say like 22, 2 tens 2 or something.
I have no idea.
Shoot, we might have to just.
Nope. I think it's all about the system. The systems that you have in place in order to be efficient in what you're trying to do.
Yes.
Is what makes the Asian culture better at math than American culture. Because there was a list of like 8 numbers, and if you asked me what those 8 numbers are, I couldn't tell you. However, someone with an Asian culture, they were able to memorize those 8 numbers in 2 seconds because of the way that their system, their language was created compared to ours. Something like 90% of people with Asian culture backgrounds were able to do this, but a very few amount of people in the English culture weren't able to do that.
And then the second aspect here, this is where the rice paddies came in. So there's a certain section in China where I think it was like the wet rice region where for about 9 months of the year they have to work from dawn until dusk cultivating the rice fields.
Yes.
And it's very intricate, that entire process. So instead of just planting the fields, they have to make sure that the field is level, that the space between each plant is separated accordingly.
6
they have
inches.
to make sure the water that they
doesn't get too warm in the summer.
They have to build pipelines to be able to increase or decrease the amount of water that's coming into those plantations. And keep in mind that this was a long time ago.
Yes.
Like there was no modern technology whatsoever. But this is how people made their living. And that hard work, that always on mindset is another factor that kind of catapults them above. And so
makes them an outlier.
Yeah, it makes them an outlier in a sense. So like that was the second aspect in addition to that math.
All right, you want to wrap us up here with chapter 9?
Yeah. So I think it's.
You don't know how to pronounce it either?
I'm not going to try to pronounce it.
M-
Marita's Bargain.
Yep. Is summer vacation a bad thing?
So, I mean, thinking back to my school days, I loved it too.
Yeah.
But
ultimately, did it hurt us?
Malcolm Gladwell and the research that he does in this book says it does. It does hurt us.
It does.
So it goes back to those points. You have the lower, middle, and upper class. The upper class families are always going to take their kids and put them into summer school development programs, different clubs, activities, because they have the opportunity to push their kids in that aspect. But on the lower end of the spectrum, they cannot. So they're resulted to watch television, go out and play with their friends, which isn't a bad thing. But in terms of the schooling, this is where the separation comes in.
Yes.
So during the school year, all of them increase by a certain manner. But where the difference comes from is over the summer. The upper class completely destroys the middle and lower class because they are able to keep learning.
Yeah.
So that just goes to show that summer vacation is ultimately harmful.
It's devastating to the progress that people make in their education.
And then when you go into the school system, it goes back to like the Canadian hockey players.
Mm-hmm.
Once you are noted as stronger or better capacity to learn,
you get put in the gifted classes.
You get put in the gifted classes. So that's going to keep accelerating them even more.
Yep.
So then that gap widens even further.
Yep.
So that goes back, like, should summer school really be?
Going back to 48 Laws of Power, I think if you were to implement something like shorter summers, that would be too big of a change.
Yeah.
And you would get a lot of backlash and resentment from not only the kids, but also the parents, because at the same time, parents use that opportunities to take their kids on vacation or spend time with their family or go to sporting events. And I don't think you would really be able to implement that into the American school system just because this is how we've been doing it for so long. And I think, again, it goes back to the education system that we have here in the United States. Is it benefiting us or is it failing us? And I think it's really up to your own ideas.
And to tie in the point, the title of this chapter, Marita's bargain. So she goes to school in the Bronx, of an extremely poor area. So it's called the KIP, the Knowledge is Power program. And what they did is, if you sign up, you're entered into a lottery, and a certain amount of kids from the Bronx areas are entered into the school. And what they do here is from 7:30, I think, to 5 p.m. at night. They are
7:30 to 7.
No, it was 5.
I swear it was 7.
It was 5.
It was something crazy, something that.
No, it was 7:30 to 5. Then they had their extracurriculars and stuff afterwards.
Which would take them till what time?
But like Marita said, if she would go home right away, she would get home around 5:30.
Yes.
Then she would do school for about 2 hours, take a 30-minute break to eat because her mom made her, and then keep going for another 2 hours. So go to bed at 11. Then she said she was up at 5:30.
Would you like that? I don't think I would like that.
It's all depending on like putting in your 10,000 hours.
True.
It's like, where do you want to go? Where do you want to get to? Because ultimately, like, if you put in the time, it's going to pay dividends. Like, so what Malcolm Gladwell is arguing throughout this entire book is an outlier is not really an outlier.
No.
It's the inputs that you're able to put into your own life to be able to control your surroundings. So Marita was able to have a unique experience. That opportunity to her completely changed her life. But the input she's able to go in, so she was like, I used to hang out with a friend from my old school, and I had to stop talking to her because she was like, you can do it too. But that friend from the other school was like, you're always doing stuff. And Marita was like, yeah, but it helps me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's enabling me to learn faster.
Yeah.
And the other girl was like,
she had no interest.
No. And Marita was like, now I only hang with people from the KIT
program. Yep.
So manufacture your inputs to determine where you want to go. And if you want that life where you don't want to be always on the clock, always pushing for that next level, if you're content, then I think it's fine to not go and do that. But it's all about what you're trying to do. Yeah.
Alrighty, I think that pretty much sums up Outliers. I guess, what are you thinking for implementation from this week? Or do you want me to start first?
Yeah, go ahead.
For me, I want to really practice on the practical intelligence. Like I was mentioning in the book, once you hit that threshold of 120 IQ, more points in your IQ doesn't translate to more opportunities. However, the more practical intelligence you have, those opportunities will come. Being able to really deal with that, being able to understand what's going on in the situation that you're in, and being able to talk your way maybe out of it or maybe through it is more important than IQ. And I think that's something that I want to try to dig a little deeper on.
So I'm maybe putting you on the spot, but how are you going to make that practical? Because that is a pretty high...
Huge. I think it's more about learning and listening than it is actually applying, if that makes sense. This isn't something that I'm going to be able to implement and see immediate effects in. It's something that I'm going to have to just sit around and maybe just kind of people watch, see how people react with other people, maybe how different cultures react, or how professors react with each other. What can I take away from those types of people and implement into my life in order to, when I'm dealing with a professor, okay, how does this professor like to be spoke to, right? How do people of other cultural backgrounds like to do things on the weekend type of thing, is how I plan on implementing it.
Yeah, I think you could put yourself in unique scenarios.
Yeah, for sure. They have to be self-induced.
Yeah, like manufactured on your end.
Exactly.
But in terms of like, that's where the learning is going to come from.
Yeah.
Like PI is all about personal experience.
Exactly.
It's not going to be book knowledge.
Nope.
That's good. Mine, I want to try to understand like what's already in place for me. So like what type of background do I have that's going to put me in a certain direction in a sense. Like, do you kind of see what I'm saying? Like based on my heritage, based on how I was raised, based on where I'm at now, all those factors combined, like what hindrances because of that do I have, what opportunities do I have because of that, and just kind of be able to weigh that out in front of me. And I think it'll be useful moving forward.
It'll be something hard to implement, I think. But
I think just getting a piece of paper, like
baseline.
Like, for example, they were able, like the Jewish background, they were not able to own land, so they were able to go to urban areas and learn those skilled trades that they were able to translate into a business in America. And yeah, that's going to be hard to implement because it's obviously different times. But maybe just understanding that background of where I'm from, what my parents did, etc.
That'll be a good one. Moving on to favorite quotes for the week. I'll start us off here. He already mentioned it earlier, but I'll just re-say it here. Achievement is less about talent than it is opportunity. Everybody has the capability to be talented, right? I guess thinking about, is someone smart, or do you feel like you're smart? I don't think it's a smart thing. I think it's an opportunity thing, and I think it's a capability thing. I think everybody has the capability to be smart, and everybody has the capability to be extremely talented in what they do. It's just about taking advantage of the opportunities that they have in order to make themselves known to an extent.
Put the work in to be able to be ready when those opportunities present themselves. Because if you don't have those 10,000 hours, you don't put in the work beforehand, and those opportunities come in,
you're not gonna know what to do with them.
You're not gonna know what to do with them, and it may never come in again.
No.
In your entire life.
It's like a log thrown into the river. What does it do?
It goes out
flows downstream, out of sight, out of mind. Right. That like opportunities. You miss an opportunity, you may never get that same opportunity again. So you need to take advantage and be prepared to take advantage of the opportunity.
Yep. Mine is from chapter 8 here, from the rice paddies and math test. So it goes back to the rice paddies, and a famous saying that they said was, "No one can rise before dawn 360 days a year, fails to make his family rich." And that just kind of goes to show, if you put in the work and you're able to control the inputs of your environment, then you will see that fruition of
you have the fruit of your labor.
Yeah, the fruit of your labor. And that directly ties into the rice paddies, because it is a result of how hard they work. Like, how hard they work completely determined how the rice came in harvest season,
The quality of the rice.
the quality of the rice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there's so many different factors that they had to account for, and if they were able to control all of them, like pulling the weeds, watering,
Might be tedious, but at the end of the day,
the hard work pays off.
exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I think that does a good job of explaining Outliers here. I guess next week's book, Poor Charlie's Almanac by Charlie Munger.
Yep. Charlie's autobiography with hints of other people conveying their thoughts as well.
Yeah.
So that wraps up this week's episode. Thank you everyone for tuning in.
Yeah. Follow us on social media, Bound to Improve on Instagram, TikTok, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and Spotify. See you next week.
Thank you.